The slasher genre is one that has both united and split horror fans for decades now. Some call it schlocky, some call it inventive, but I'm sure both sides can agree that they've given us some of the most iconic characters and moments in horror history. When I think horror, I think Leatherface, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Chucky and Ghostface. I'm sure there are other iconic antagonists out there that you could argue deserve a spot in this horror hall of fame, but I would say these guys are the main players when it comes to the OG slasher films. As I said before, reception for these franchises is mixed to say the least, so as it's October, I thought I'd look back on and then rank the first film in every franchise to determine whether or not the fans of these films and their haters have a leg to stand on. Just to be clear, that means I'll be ranking the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play and Scream. Obviously a lot of this is going to be down to my own personal preferences and opinions, but I will try to include some objectivity in this discussion, weighing out each film's lasting effect and influence. So without further ado, the slasher film that comes in at last place is Friday the 13th. When you go online and see people talking about how horror movies are mostly lazily and sloppily put together attempts at grabbing some cash, they're talking about movies like Friday the 13th. Ah yes, the franchise that kept going and going every time it had supposedly wrapped up because it brought in loads of money with every release. And it all started with this movie, which was bought by the studio before a script was even written because it had a catchy and easily sellable title. What I'm trying to get at here is that Friday the 13th is such an obvious attempt to cash in on the popularity of movies like Halloween with no intent of bringing anything new to the table or formula. The only way I can get enjoyment out of this film, or any Friday the 13th film for that matter, is by watching it with friends and laughing at the over-the-top deaths, or the constant attempts by the writers to shoehorn in a pair of boobs or a sex scene. This movie is shocking at creating any kind of atmosphere or tension. Its idea of a suspenseful scene is just having a character go about their day-to-day stuff for 5 minutes whilst hearing a noise every now and then before they're suddenly killed in seconds by an off-screen killer. And what lies between these moments? Just padding upon padding of pointless scenes between the counselors that don't progress the story, build the characters, or create any sense of dread or, you know, horror. If it wasn't for the score, the effects and Betsy Palmer's appearance, I don't think I could find anything I liked in this movie. Even if you accept and enjoy the fact that this franchise is pretty much just popular for its elaborate death scenes, like I can at points, you still get way more of those once Jason is introduced in the sequels than you do here. Instead, you'll be treated to lifeless characters, half-hearted scares, an unbelievably padded runtime, and an overall bland experience. If I was to make one recommendation in this video, it would be to give this movie a skip. It's horror at its laziest. Child's Play. I can't believe what a quality jump there is between this and Friday the 13th. Honestly, from this point on, I like all of these movies. They're all unique and effective in their own ways, and Child's Play stands out for actually being pretty fucking badass. Somehow the doll character has some of the coolest moments within these films, utilising his height and friendship with a child to attack people in really cool or really intense ways. Speaking of tension, the film manages to build it pretty well, especially in the first half before we even see Chucky speak. Watching him sneak around gives me Gremlins vibes, Andy's friendship with him is chilling, and the shift from teenage protagonist to a mother and son creates an added layer of empathy that makes you pray for them to come out okay. The film does take a huge misstep in its opening though by explaining to us who the killer is straight away. Now, even though it is fun to watch our protagonists learn about Chucky, everything we're told we already know because of the opening. It takes away the essential element of horror that is the mystery angle, which means there's always one less layer of tension to focus on than there could have been. Other than that though, honestly, I have a blast with this film, and judging by the general reaction to the critics when comparing it to the other movies here, I'd definitely class it as my main horror guilty pleasure movie. Being completely honest, I would like to place it higher on this list, but trying to keep an objective angle here, I just don't think it's as iconic or influential as these other films. Halloween. Jesus, I'm going to get a lot of shit for this being so low down. I like Halloween. It's eerie and effective, and I can see why so many future movies would draw influence from it, but if there's one film from this bunch that is let down most by its age and budget, it's this one, because its ideas and setups are so much better than those restrictions allow it to be when watching it in 2021. Take the opening scene for example. It's iconic, it ends on a great twist, the one-shot look is impressive for a film of its time, but this actress is really bad at pretending to be killed, and that long shot with the two parents standing still the whole time feels extremely awkward and something that would never be overlooked these days. It's moments like that in the direction and editing that don't ruin the film, but makes it not as easy to watch as the other films in this list, in my opinion of course. I can see for a fact that this was groundbreaking in 1978, but by today's standards, It feels a bit more amateurish. Obviously none of that is the film's fault though, so let's get into some positives. This film invents a lot of the classic rules we know inside and out today, but actually pulls them off with purpose. The Virgin Girl doesn't just survive because she's the Virgin Girl, but because Laurie Strode is a clear standout amongst her selfish and horny friends in a commentary about the corruption of small town life. She's responsible, selfless, and a really likeable character to root for as the film goes on. That's where Halloween thrives. It's in the small things. It's the repetitive score that constantly gives a sense that Michael Myers is around, making it impossible to relax while watching. It's the muffled breathing of the killer that makes him seem so much more real and human. It's the framing of Michael in the background that makes sure you're always searching the edges of the frame for him. As much as it may not be a scary watch in this day and age, it's impossible not to see and appreciate the care that went into crafting this movie. So even though it's a flawed watch compared to some of these other movies, it's one I think every horror fan can enjoy, and it deserves its classic title just for being a genuine attempt at horror by filmmakers who care. A Nightmare on Elm Street. I have similar issues with Nightmare on Elm Street than I do with Halloween, but I think Nightmare is just too creative with its concept and special effects that it's way easier to overlook the more dated aspects of the movie. Wes Craven's ideas and direction are extremely refreshing when watching all of these movies back to back. I mean, the concept that you can't fall asleep or you'll get killed by a man in your dreams is just genius for a horror film, and the deaths are some of the best in slasher history as a result. Besides some outdated effects though, the biggest clue that this film was made a long time ago under strict time and budget restrictions is its pacing. The movie just kind of jumps right into the action with no build-up or tension building, making the first 20 minutes of the film feel really rushed and shoddily put together. It's that lack of patience throughout the film that takes away from Freddy Krueger's presence a little bit. Like, he doesn't feel as much of a mysterious or dangerous figure as the other villains featured in this video because he's never really built up, he's just there and killing people right from the beginning. Oddly though, after that first 20 minutes, the breakneck pace becomes one of the things I like most about the film. Nothing here feels padded out, and for the most part, you're just going from creative horror sequence to creative horror sequence with some really inventive visuals to keep things fresh throughout. It also doesn't hurt that Wes Craven is great at building tension when he wants to, and Nancy is a pretty likeable character who you watch become stronger as the story moves forward. So as a concept, A Nightmare on Elm Street is groundbreaking, and as a film, it's kind of flawed but still undeniably a fun time. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I always used to wonder why Halloween got a lot of the credit for influencing the slasher genre when Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out nearly 5 years before it, but upon my latest viewing, I think it's clear to see why. This movie's not about a bunch of hot teenagers sneaking off to have sex before they get killed in a way that makes you go, It's, well, as director Toby Hooper phrased it, it's about meat. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is dirty, grimy, gritty. If it was a food, it would have flies hovering around it. If you could smell it, it'd smell as bad as the sets allegedly smell. The set design, editing, practical effects and direction make this film a really uncomfortable and gruesome watch. You feel like you need a shower after watching this movie. Unlike the films before this, the low budget and age actually works in the film's favour. It creates a really grounded and lifelike experience, like you're watching a documentary. Does it have its cheesy moments? Sure, but for every moment that makes you laugh, there's also something that makes you shift around in your seat because you're just so weirded out by what you're being shown. Every time you're in the villain's house, the film is just pure horror and has some of the most pulse-pounding encounters between a protagonist and their killer I've ever seen. It's not perfect. I mean, the survivor girl is the character that I feel actually has the least screen time and personality in the first half of the film, but the performances and the filmmaking are enough to keep me horrified as the plot unfolds despite that. You don't need to put yourselves in the shoes of a 70s audience to find Texas Chainsaw Massacre effective, and if any film on this list has imagery that will flash in your mind at night time, it's this one. Scream. In a world where we have decades of horror film history to learn from, it's pretty impressive how few movies use that knowledge to switch things up and create something fresh. Scream, however, does exactly that. At a point in time where audiences were tired of the old slasher tropes, Scream came by to say what everyone was thinking and make one of the greatest slashers of all time in the process. And no, it's not one note in its meta humour like Deadpool being like, hey, aren't CGI fights shit? Well, here's a CGI fight. Instead, it addresses the cliches and subverts them in a way that allows it to move beyond the sum of its parts while managing to still be respectful to the old classics that led to the film's existence. And wouldn't you know it, Wes Craven is in the director's chair again and still being innovative with the genre 12 years after Nightmare on Elm Street. Scream just has so much personality and succeeds in everything it wants to do thanks to the performances, writing, music and direction. When it wants to be scary, it creates one of the best opening scenes to a horror film of all time. When it wants to be funny, funny, it fucking makes you laugh. And my god, is this cast just so charming. Neve Campbell, Shaggy, definitely not Johnny Depp, Quentin Tarantino, Monica, they all go beyond their typical caricatures to create a likeable and fun cast. Other than the climax having some leaps in logic and running a little long, Scream has me hooked for its entire journey thanks to everything I've said so far, and we could definitely use more horror films that are just as well put together and self-aware as this one. So there you have it, there's my list. Let me know in the comments how you'd personally rank each of these movies, but all in all, I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed this binge. I've seen all of these films and their sequels a few times when I was younger, but I was shocked to see how many of these held up for me. The slasher genre isn't exactly fine art, and I don't think anyone would argue that it was, but if you're up for just having a fun time experiencing a few scares and some inventive violence, there's quite a bit to get out of these films. I'd argue their names have largely been squandered thanks to their mostly half-hearted cash grab sequels, apart from Friday the 13th, whose sequels actually kind of improved on the formula. So if you haven't seen these OG films in a while and can't really remember what you think of them, I would seriously reconsider rewatching them this Halloween. I've been Mitchell Burrows, and if you enjoyed the video, why not leave a like and hit that subscribe button. Remember to comment below what you think of all these movies, and with that, I'll see you soon.